the second part of the lecture is organized a little bit around the history of augmented reality. So who of you thinks that augmented reality has a history of, say, let's be generous, 20 years? Okay, so the oldest AR experience probably is that is quite popular still, is Pepper's Ghost, which is from the 1890s, or the book is from the 1890s, and it was actually not only John Henry Pepper, but Henry Dirks, who originally came up with that idea that had been floating around for a while. And Dirks tried to commercialize it, miserably failed with it, and John Henry Pepper helped him there, and they actually had some success. As you can see, that made it into Disneyland's Haunted Mansion and many other applications. Over the years, they tried to market this as a theater technology. You would have a ghost and some lighting system below a stage, then a glass pane that would reflect the image of the ghost as if it were in the room of that person. And I think Dirks, if I got that right, not a historian of technology, Dirks' main problem was that he tried to convince theaters to convert, and they just didn't want to make the investment. Talks about a lot of magical things that you find out there in the real world. And he basically describes that same situation of having a room in which you have a glass pane set up in a way that it reflects light into the room as if it were there with you. And that is pretty much the earliest description of augmented reality that I'm aware of so far. It is not digital, but it is clearly artificial. And it aims to manipulate the experiences we have. So I think it fits quite well into the definitions that we have worked out so far. But that's a long time ago. And also in the 19th century, certainly not much happened with respect to new technologies, although that's the time where camera obscura and all other sort of things flourish. And the film technologies ultimately invented, or the predecessors for that. And certainly is very exciting. The real technological development, targeted development of what I think resembles modern day augmented reality is certainly starting somewhere in the 50s. And quite naturally in the US, and quite naturally because it's the US with military technologies. So that's a work from 1958 where you have an early head-up display. There are a few related patents that Mark Billinghurst dug out. McCollum Stereo TV from 1943, a patent. Or Morton Heilig's multisensory head-mounted display, which is kind of already resembling what we would see in modern times. Yeah, then the Philco head sight. The head-mounted display from 1961, and many people attribute to Sutherland to be the grandfather of head-mounted displays. So that here is an example of Sword of Damocles. So you can imagine the cable that is going up there is of course going to a quite massive computer. Slightly different than what we're used to today, where everything is portable. And the graphics resolution is somewhat not really what we expect today, but considering that this was 1968, that is quite impressive. There are a lot more head-mounted displays that you would find in the 60s and 70s. Tom Furness's work here, for example, largely all behind closed doors and not available to the public, which also then motivated some of these people like Tom Furness to ultimately pursue a scientific career and see that these technologies are also used to the benefit of the public and not just in some research labs hidden away for doubtful ethical motives. Yeah, There are more Air Force helmets here as an example, 1970s to today. But I think for modern day and age AR, the more significant thing that happened was in the 90s when Boeing, the company, the airplane company, started also digging into these technologies and coined the word augmented reality. So that actually comes from a paper here from 1992 from Caudell and Mizell, where they first time used the word augmented reality. Before there would have been other words like head-mounted display that weren't used for that. And they, at that time, investigated how they can use these technologies to reduce human error, increase efficiency, increase effectiveness at the workplace. And quite funnily, the papers, they became famous, or Boeing became famous for, in recent years again, circle exactly around the same topic on a completely different level. So I think I will have a slide on that here in a second as well. So that is 1992, which is also the time where then some of the people from the military kind of jump off into science, and where certainly one can say the serious academic research begins around augmented reality with Azuma's work. We've already seen his definition, and the motion stabilized display is, for example, something that he's famous for. Marker-based tracking in video, 1995. Other tracking technologies around magnets, for example. That's not just something that needs to be done with optical cameras. There are many other ways. I mean to remember that around that time, maybe a little bit later, the research lab in Cambridge had also some interesting tracking technology based on sound, on Bajura sound. Wouldn't have brought a dog into that room to test, but yeah. The wearable computing group around Mann, here on the left. I'm not even sure they're real or robotic. They have certainly spearheaded some of the development around wearable devices and taken that quite serious. That was happening around there, 1996. 1998, the probably biggest academic conference, the International Symposium for Mixed and Augmented Reality, ISMAR, started. At that time. It still had a different name, IWAR. And it still is probably the most important conference in the field for the technological aspects. 1997, Feiner, who is also on our advisory board of the project, with the work around the Turing machine, a portable augmented reality system, but comparing that with the same computing power that is in my pocket today, times have certainly moved on and become a little bit more accessible. 1999, AR Toolkit, which was the first open source tracking library, was born. It still is around. 2007, then probably the point where one could say that augmented reality kind of goes into the mainstream. So in that year, for the first time, the MIT Technology Review, which is a quite influential source, moving things forward, listed it as a top 10 breakthrough technology. And in that case, I think that's augmented reality on the level that all of us have experienced it. It was rather more combining orientation in a mobile phone with GPS information about where you actually are, and then displaying what landmarks you might be seeing, as you see here. So, a rather very specific form of augmented reality, but nonetheless something that is ready for the main market, for the mainstream market, and has certainly pushed things forward. Pushed things forward like Wikitude, which was born around that time, 2008, still is around. Both as an authoring toolkit to be used by end users, as well as a SDK to be used by software developers. Then we have other similar companies be born, like Lyar, 2009, was just a few years ago taken over by Blipbar, the UK-based company. Many of these started off with the magazine cover, scan the magazine cover to get an overlay experience on your mobile phone, but also have the location-based services like this to complement it with. 2009 as well, Argon, which is the first open technology browser for augmented reality, still is around. It has, in fact, in my thinking, provided quite a bit of offspring, and currently has led Blair McIntyre, who's also on our advisory board, to work for the Mozilla Foundation with something great. And the Mozilla Foundation is pushing Firefox and other ideas, and is also pushing at the moment to make the web more AR enabled. So the creation of augmented reality experiences can be done with browser technologies, and maybe make it then equally successful as we had with web, if it's so simple that everyone can do it. So that is certainly coming also from Argon, but there are other people involved there as well, not only there. Also still around. Yeah, then also 2009 AR Toolkit moves over to Flash, which makes visuals quite exciting and has a huge user base at that point in time. Then shortly after that, I think, are the first experiments of smart glasses. Google Glass you probably have heard of, if not in the negative press context of being a glass hole, and the big debate that stipulated around privacy. And we shouldn't blame Google for that, I think. It was the first smart glasses device that became very successful. Tens of thousands of them being sold, and it still is around. That is not a shelf product. It still has its application in the enterprise segment. There are clicker applications that you would find in warehouses and many other things that require a small information display like that. But the experiments we did with it with respect to augmented reality are rather diminished. So it is possible to do registered proper AR with overlays in the room, but it's not fun and it doesn't look great. And if you look at something that close from one eye all the time, it makes you feel like a funny comic figure after a day of wearing it. One of the devices, I think, that made even more impact than the Google Glass is, I think, the Epson BT100. That was in 2011, which is still a product. It's a stereo display with a little caddy that you have for interaction, but it also houses some of the computational power. At the moment, the current version is the BT300 or 350, and a more enterprise-oriented version, the 35E. We have one lying around of the BT200 somewhere, not using it anymore at the moment, as we use the more expensive devices. But it was the first one that had stereo display and a really nice, crisp display. 2014, the first serious player for big smart glasses appears. And that is Dakri, a startup company from Ireland originally, now based in Los Angeles and across the globe. So they also have bought a company in Hastings and a company in Milton Keynes, a few others. They produced a helmet with a lot of additional sensors that suddenly worked towards changing the game as we know it. You have already seen a very brief preview of one smart helmet application, and that was the one with the Pipeworks, but they are at the moment working on multiple devices that are also cheaper. The helmet is quite pricey, but they have smart glasses as well, and they have taken up some work with automotive companies for car head-up displays, so that the driver has a kind of visual tunnel where he can see things projected into the road. Quite cool. So they're up and coming company, quite big and very serious. And, they do great things. 2012, a nice artifact here, that's Scratch. Who of you knows Scratch, the programming language for kids? A few arms up. Scratch has this way of visually programming, so you have loops and you can put conditions in with simple drag and drop, and it's on a level that a 10-year-old without problem can learn the basic programming concepts. And the group around Blair McIntyre, a PhD student here, Julian, he wrote a interface so that children can also do very simple AR applications using Scratch. And if you look at them, they're actually not even that simple. So it's a game of pizza carrier to deliver pizza to the football player. It's actually quite fancy. Yeah. I'm not sure that actually still runs. I haven't tried it. It's a few years ago, but the downloads are still available.
Okay.
2014 here, that's from my own lab. Again, an example where we did hands-on tutoring with what we call ghost hands. We used an additional sensor and a stationary computer for a remote tutor that would then transmit their hand movement live to the site of a worker in a manufacturing environment.
Couple threads here and here
to explain over audio and with the hand movement what they need to do.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's footage from some trial, and that is supposed to be some part of, I believe, a weaving mill, which we found a bit too big to fit into our office, about 4 meters wide and 3 meters deep. The other test cases, we built similar cardboard machinery or Rubin Goldberg machines to test under sort of realistic conditions how people like these ghost hands. The other parts and tasks that we tested were in the helicopter industry. And surprisingly, again, no one wanted to lend us a helicopter, although we were working with a company that produces them. Yeah, Boeing again, here, 2014 also moved and took up a lot of things, as there is very little investigation of how well AR actually performs in industrial contexts, and that was one of the few papers that investigated that. They found that in comparison to desktop use, that's a typical situation that you would find in an airplane manufacturer. You have a computer standing somewhere at the side where people can always go consult the manual, the instructions on how they need to mount a specific wingspan. Compared to tablet-based augmented reality and the tablet-based handbook, where they at least have the tablet at hand, you can see that the number of errors people produce is immensely lower. So they found, first-time quality results improved by 90%. Whereas even the completion time was down by 30%, and that is quite impressive. That is something that hits the bottom line in industry. And that certainly made a lot more people alert and led to a lot of funds being released into the augmented reality world. 2016, the HoloLens, that's the device that we will work on. The first one came out in 2016. There were small, minor improvements over time. There were some additional versions announced, but ultimately not released. So that just to show you the difference, what effect it has on the user, I have tested all these smart glasses technologies with my 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old over the time. And with that HoloLens here, it was the first time that it reached a level of wow. And I want to buy one. I'm starting to save now. How much are they? 3,000. Okay, I'll start to save now. And it is also with normal participants, older people, that we have them giggling in experiments and trying to touch things and stuff like that. So here's an example of one of my favorite games, that is Young Conquer.
Just look at me and say, let's go to get this game started.
So that's a little squirrel. It's like a little AI that follows you around, and you direct it with that cursor that appears here and there. And what Young Conquer does is it's a jump and run that maps out your environment surrounding you and then works with that space. So it will adapt to the floor space available, look at the walls and ceilings and integrate them into the gameplay. The video is not a good representation of what it really feels like. So the video tries to combine then the video feed coming from a different camera with what you would see in the display, and that doesn't work really well. It looks very stunningly real in real and much more beautiful than here. But you can see it's a fun game, and I haven't played it through all levels, but it must be some 10-15 hours of gameplay, I'm sure. Yeah. The competitor, or one of the competitors, is the Magic Leap. Here's a conceptual video that some of you may have seen when it came out in 2015. The device is now finally released, also only the developer version. Like the HoloLens, you can't buy it at the moment, you can only buy it as a developer. The big push towards consumer devices is still to be expected, and that will also be the point in time where these devices are much cheaper. So at the moment, the Magic Leap, I don't remember what is the current price. You bought one? How much?
About 2,000.
2,000. And the HoloLens is slightly higher. I think the last one I bought was with the educational discount. A little bit more, not much. But all of them have plans to make these kind of mobile phone, expensive mobile phone sized ultimately. And the arguments for that are also that from the hardware they should be cheaper. So that game is one of the games that are actually released on the Magic Leap 1. I think it has changed quite a bit from there and has become a little bit less bloody. But it looks like good fun. Yeah. So there are currently probably 40 producers of smart glasses around the globe. They're mostly new tech startups. There are hardly any of the classical optics companies in that field at the moment, although some of them have realized and have started doing stuff. Similarly, some of the computing giants seem to have slept over this wave of personal computing again. And even giants like Intel did only very limited things and recently shelved one of their quite nicely looking information display products. But there's certainly something big coming that we need to prepare for. Of those 40 producers, there are, however, only probably a handful of candidates that have a serious quality similar to the device that we work on here. Yeah, summary for the history. 1960s to 80s, early experimentation. 1980s to 90s, basic research starts in tracking display technology. 1990s to 2000s, tools and applications are coming out with then the first commercial applications for games, for the medical, industrial use cases. Somewhere around 2011, the smart glasses are coming on a serious level. Smart glasses for the consumer market, not just some products that are ultimately ending up in dentist offices. And yeah, I think round about the invention of the HoloLens, there's certainly something else happening, and that has to do, for me, with the spatial computing capabilities and SLAM and other technologies that allow to really work with the environment and not only with marker-based augmented reality. That is a summary of the history of augmented reality. And I hope you enjoyed it, and I thank you for your attention.